Hey there, Mr. Chew's here with another Math Minute with Mr. Chew. Let's talk about a difficult algebra topic called completing the square. So now we're talking about a polynomial, so if you're someone that needs help in algebra, make sure you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, tell your friends Mr. Chew is planning to help you with algebra. So when you're completing a square, we're thinking about a quadratic. So we have the standard form of a quadratic of ax squared plus bx plus c. The first thing you have to do before you can complete a square, you have to make sure that a equals 1. So on step 1, a has to equal 1. If it does not equal 1, then you need to divide by that coefficient. So what this really means is, it means that you're going to end up having some variable to the second power, plus or minus some value of a coefficient to that same variable to the first power. After I've taken care of that, then my second step is to find 1/2 of b. And a lot of times we can just call that b over 2. So you just take whatever number is in front of the x, divide it by 2. And why do we do that? Because in step 3 we have to square that. So in this particular step here, you're finding this number. So you have to write it down and figure out what it is. In this step, we're still finding it, only now we're squaring it. All right? Now, after we have found that, we're going to add and subtract this number that we just found squared to the x squared plus bx term. You add it and subtract it. Now, why would you add something and subtract it? Because adding and subtracting makes it go away. We don't want to change the value of our original quadratic. And then on your last step, when you're almost done, you're going to have your x squared plus your bx plus your b over 2 squared minus your b over 2 squared. And then we're going to take this part right here and this part right here and then factor it. And that is when you've completed the square. So on your last step, when you're about done here, when you factor this, you just get an x. Here's your trick. And you're just getting what's in the parentheses here. Quantity squared. And then in order to get back and get rid of your c so that you have your original x squared plus bx, you always have to remember to subtract that. All right. Now let's look at some examples. So this is 6a. It's not 6, it's 6a. Why do I say that? Because we ask you to work a couple of problems. And I asked students in MM-6, which was my first video on this, to work problems 1A and 1B, and now I'm going to work them out for you. So problem 1A, which was a challenge problem from my introductory video, it's asking you to find what the perfect square would be if my quadratic is y squared minus 10y. Well, in this case, remember, we have a y squared plus by plus c. That is my standard form. So what does a equal? Well, there's a 1 here. So a equals 1. My b is -10. In this case, c is 0. So when I think about all my steps I wrote down over here, since a is 1, step 1 has been satisfied. We're good. All right, so step 1 is good. Let's just get rid of the standard form here, and let's start doing steps 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'd be done. All right, step 2 says, find 1/2 of b, or b over 2. So over here, I just write b over 2 would equal -10 over 2, which is -5. All right, I just found it. I'm done with step 2. Step 3 says square that. Find b over 2 squared. So in step 3, I take b over 2 and square that. So that's -5 squared, which is 25. Just did that. I'm already 3 steps in now. Step 4, add or subtract that number I just found on step 3 to my original, and it's not x squared plus bx, it's going to be y squared plus by. So I take my y squared minus 10y, and then I'm going to add this number and subtract that number. Now you might be saying, well, why didn't you write it as 25? Because there is a shortcut here. So now that is step 4. Now we're going to write it as a factor in step 5. I'm going to say, okay, I've got this and then minus -5 squared. And we said to go to step 6, look at what happens. My number in the parentheses just comes out here. So in step 6, this is y, and then plus -5. That number is what I write here, squared minus 25. Now, usually you don't write something as plus a -5. Usually just write that as -5. So there's my completed square. Now, since students are usually doubting Thomases, which means they don't believe it, let's take this and rewrite it as y minus 5 times y minus 5. And then let's subtract our 25 from that and see if we get our y squared minus 10y. And you remember how you do this? Using FOIL. First, y times y is y squared. The O is outer. Y times -5 is -5y. The I is inner. -5 times y is -5y. And then the last -5 times -5 is 25, and then we subtract 25. I have like terms here and like terms here. This is y squared minus 10y, and then 25 minus 25 is 0. This number and this number is the same, which means I just checked it. Now, I will say this. Some people know the shortcut to get here, that this perfect square is just y squared minus 2 times the product minus 10y plus 25. And you could have just written it if you remember that from algebra class. All right, so now let's get to problem 2a now. On 2a, it's harder. Why is it harder? It's harder because a does not equal 1. In the real world, a usually doesn't equal 1. And so you have to change it, manipulate it, factor it, such that a equals 1. Okay? All right. So let's look at 2a now. 6x squared plus 9x. Does a equal 1? No, it does not. So I have to take and factor out a 6. So if I factor a 6 out of 6x squared, that's going to be x squared. And if I factor a 6 out of 9x, it becomes 9 over 6x. And this reduces to, I can divide them both by 3 halves. All right, so don't forget you're going to have a 6 on the outside, but what we're dealing with is this part right here. That's what we're completing the square on, because you have to have step 1, and I have step 1 now. So if I have step 1, so we've got step 1, so a equals 1. Now we're going to take 1/2 of b, or b over 2. So which one is the b? The b is 3 halves. Now, it's easier whenever you have a fraction as a coefficient to use that 1/2 times b. 1/2 times b is going to be 1/2 times 3 halves, which ends up being 3/4. See that? So now I've just done 2, and now we're going to do 3. 3 is, I have to take this number and square it. So 1/2 times b squared is 3/4 squared. So that equals 9/16. All right, now once I have that completed to that point, I can come back to number 4 and add and subtract this number. So on step 4, I take my original over here, so we got 6 times x squared plus 3/2 x, and then I'm going to add the 3/4 squared, and now I'm going to subtract the 3/4 squared. Remember, I got to keep that 6 out there because that's how I started the whole process, okay? All right. Now, I am going to take this number right here and write it in parentheses on its own. If you want to make this a bracket, you can. Most people would do that. Like that. Well, this number ends up being a perfect square. I can rewrite this using this shortcut right here. So don't forget about the 6 out here. And on the inside here, I've got my x, and I've got plus whatever's in the parentheses here. And I square that minus 9/16. That's your answer. This is my completed square. Now, if you're that doubting Thomas that says, okay, let's see if that's really true. So I'm going to take my 6 times my x plus 3/4 times x plus 3/4 minus 9/16. And I should get my 6x squared plus 9x up here. Let's see if we do. So I've got my 6 times, I did go first, x squared, outer plus 3/4 x, inner plus 3/4 x, last 9/16 minus 9/16. Now the good thing is here, the 9/16 minus 9/16 goes away, and so that's 0 here. So 3/4 x plus 3/4 x force x. So we do the distributive property here. So that equals 6x, 6 times x, and then plus 6 over 1 times 6 over 4x. And look what happens here. I've got a common factor of 2 here, and 2 goes into 2 twice, goes here 3 times. And that's 18, and then 2 goes into 2 once, and it goes into here 3 times. So it ends up being 6x plus 9x, which is what I had up here. All right, so this has been about a 16-minute video, but now I want to challenge you to work a couple problems, and it's going to be from the first one. If you'd already done it, then you've already figured this out. So we're going to have problem 1 and 2 from MM-6 here. You can pause it, and there will be a link at the top of this video for you to work them. So here they are. So this is MM-6A for MM-6. Problem 1 is x squared plus 6x. Problem 2 is 2y squared minus 6y. So this one's a little bit harder because it's got the coefficient above 1 here. So see if you can try those. There will be a link up here at the top of your video if you're on a computer where you can go to it, or you can go in my playlist after you subscribe, like, and share. And remember, I'm Mr. Chew, and I want to help you learn the algebra. We'll see you in the next video.